This next story is a real eye-opener. A man in the U.S. recently stung by a bee directly on his eyeball. Think about that for a minute. How doctors responded next has now become the subject of a case study recently published in the New England Journal of Medicine. Joining us with more is Dan Riskin, CTV's science and technology specialist. In his eye, after he was stung, the man obviously goes directly to emerge. What happens from there?
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing, like, if somebody says they got stung in the eye, you expect it to be next to the eye and for it to be puffy. This was on his eyeball, like next to his iris. Like, so right between the colored part of the eye and the white part of the eye, there's the stinger there that they finally got out of there. So poor guy goes to the hospital, goes to emergency, they pull out the stinger, or at least they think they do. But 2 days later, he's still got blurry vision. He's got a totally bloodshot eye. He can barely see his fingers in front of his face. He goes to a special ophthalmology center and they take a close look. They use this special dye called fluorescent that they can put on there, and it shows where there's injury, and it highlights that there's still something bad happening at the site of the sting. And they find that little tiny stinger still in there, and they use these jeweler's forceps to pull it out and finally get it out 2 days later. And in a matter of time, he was fine. He could see totally fine.
Oh, really?
But, ugh, what a time.
And the pain. Listen, bee stings right directly on the eyeball, that's very rare. And I'm not sure if everybody knows this. I remember the first time I saw a zoomed-in image of a bee stinger, I was shocked to see that they're actually barbed. There's like hooks in them designed to make them grab on. As a result of that design, what happens to some of the patients who've been stung by a bee in the eye?
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting. So this study is about one person and how that thing just stayed in there, and they thought they had it out, but they didn't. And it was sort of a warning to other doctors that these things can be a little bit more complicated than you expect. But as part of that, they did a survey of all the eyeball stings in the scientific literature, and they found more than 50 of them in history. And what's really interesting is that the taking out of the stinger is often as traumatic for the eye as the sting itself because of those barbs. And so these doctors have to be very careful removing them. In a lot of cases, it's unclear if the damage was due to the sting or due to its removal. And so this is something that you have to be really careful with. And in fact, my favorite, they cite this one observation from 1977 where a man had a wasp stinger that stayed in his eyeball for 28 years. He got it in the 1940s, and in the 1970s, it was still there, and he was doing fine. So sometimes leaving it in place is apparently a fine thing to do.
Oh, listen, I know how sensitive eyeballs can be. I know how painful a bee sting can be, and I'm just trying to marry those two things together. But apparently, you've got one of your own experiences. What can you tell us about this?
Well, when the story talked about this fluorescent dye that they used in the eye to find where the injury was, it reminded me of an experience I had when I was in my late 20s. I had an itchy eye, and it would not leave me alone. Like, I just constantly had this feeling that something was in my eye, and I looked in the mirror, and it turned out that the problem I had was there was a burdock needle, like, one of those. There, thank you, a picture of a burdock needle under my eyelid. It was stuck to the inside of my eyelid, so every time I blinked, it was scratching my eye. And so I went to the eye doctor, and they used this dye, and they figured out something was wrong. But it took 2 seconds. They just flipped my eyelid around, pulled it out with a pair of tweezers, and I was totally fine. But that was just a little thing scratching my eye. Can you imagine? I mean, a bee stinger has venom in it that it continues pumping after the bee loses its stinger. So I really feel a lot of sympathy for the person in the States who had this happen to them.
No kidding. You know, there's a reason that this case ended up in the New England Journal of Medicine. What was the message to the other doctors who may have to treat an injury like this with a stinger in an eyeball?
Yeah, I mean, what it was just a reminder that sometimes you think you've got the job done, you think you've got the big part of the stinger out, and there's still a little bit left. And so the hope is there's going to be that doctor, somebody comes into their office and says, I have a bee sting in my eyeball. And they're going to say, boy, I've never seen that before, because who sees that happen? And they're going to check this paper, and they're going to know that they have to watch for that little tiny barb at the end of the stinger, that has to come out as well. But, it's also a story of resilience, right? It's pretty amazing that we have these amazing bodies where you can get stung in the eyeball and you walk away and you can see just fine afterwards. The human body is sort of amazing.
I would just be hollering constantly from the pain. Emergency room doctors and nurses have the best stories. Yours among them, Dan. Thanks so much this morning.
I'm glad not to have the best story they have, because some of those are pretty creepy. Thanks a lot.
It's true.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this, be sure to subscribe here, or you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.